I think we can get started. To those of you who joined later, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate y'all being here. We're gonna get started with our review, and I'm gonna turn off the screen now. But if you haven't signed in, please sign in using the link that I just dropped in the chat. But we can switch to the Word document quickly. Okay, so what we'll be doing is be going through the we'll be going through the review document that Becca posted on Canvas and going through the answers. Preston, would you like to start?
Yes. Okay. Oh, can you open the Word document?
Oh, can you not see it? Oh,
No.
my bad.
It's okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
So question one, provide an example of variable declaration in C#. Do you need to explicitly assign a value or object to a declared variable? So in C#, unlike Python, we need to declare a type whenever we have a variable declaration. So if I were to assign the value 1 into a variable named x, I would need to do int x is equal to 1. But one thing that's kind of cool about C# is that you don't actually need to assign your variables to a value explicitly. It's always going to take on a default value. For integers,
stock.
Yeah, it's already released.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, this can be
nice
background.
Preston, I don't have the power to mute. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay.
So whenever you declare a variable without assigning it to a value, then it's going to take on a default value. In the case of a decimal or an integer, that value is going to be 0. In the case of strings, I believe it's an empty string, which is just a string of length 0.
Okay,
there we go. The power.
Yes. Okay, and yeah, it is for a string. But yeah, cool. So for the second question, we're asking how are variable data types treated differently between Python and C#? And I'd like to pose that question to y'all. What do you think? Just so we can make this a little bit more interactive. What is the difference between how Python and C# handle data types? And you can unmute or drop in the chat, whichever you prefer. Okay, so Python is a dynamically typed language, whereas C# is a statically typed language. And the difference is that in C# for every single variable, you will have to explicitly describe the data type. That's what we did over here for this decimal. And if in Python, you don't absolutely have to when you declare the variable. The Python engine, it will guess on runtime what the type is going to be. So in C#, even when you use var as a data type, it needs to be explicitly declared what data type it is. Okay, you can take it away.
Okay, cool. And then question 3, when assigning a variable of the type of the decimal type, for example, decimal dec price is equal to 5.99 M, what is the why is the M included and what exactly is it doing? I'd also like to pose that question to you guys, hopefully to make this more interactive. Yeah, Becca touched on this in class a little bit.
Just drop in the chat or you can guess. We're all friendly, we don't bite.
Yeah.
Is that just like the amount, designating the amount of decimal points that it goes to?
So by default, whenever you have a value like 1.2 or like 1.4 or 5.99 or whatever, that by default is going to be a double. So in order to specify that that value is a decimal, you need to add the M at the end. And decimals are more precise than doubles. It just has to do with how many bytes are dedicated to that type, like in memory. So yeah. What is the difference between double and a decimal? So a decimal and a double have the same functionality, as in like they both store like decimal numbers, like floating point numbers that we saw in Python, but decimals have more precision, so they can store longer decimals, like more digits after the decimal point, and doubles are they're a little bit shorter. I forget the exact number of bytes that are dedicated towards a double and a decimal, but doubles have less precision than decimals.
All right, cool. So there is an alternative you can use instead of, using the syntactic sugar, as Becca described it in class, to, declare decimals. Can someone write any guesses out in the chat? How can you do the same thing that we did here without using the M? So you use something called convert to decimal. So yeah, this is literally the statement. So you pass in the variable and you would do convert dot to decimal. And yeah, I guess that will again convert it to a decimal.
Okay. So question 5 is very, very easy. So what do you guys think that line of code is called? These 2 forward slashes and then some sort of text. What is that called?
Recording in progress.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Okay,
And
yes, and-
that somebody Tanya put comment. That is correct. And actually in C# and I believe every other languages that uses 2 forward slashes for a single line comment, you can use a forward slash and then an asterisk, and then put text in between that and have a multi-lined comment if you want, as is shown in the red text there. So reasons that you might want to use a comment. So Anjali and I were going through kind of preparing for this, and we kind of joked that a lot of the time we write comments to explain our code to ourselves, because you'll come back to code in maybe like 2 or 3 days, then you'll wonder like, what the heck is this thing actually doing? So you can use that to remind yourself what it's doing, or what is probably more often the case, you're using it to explain to others what your code is doing. So it's a good way to kind of like document your code as you're going through. Another reason why you might want to use comments in your project or like throughout your homeworks or whatever is to specify that you need to do something. So a convention that people do in software development is still have some sort of comment, and in all caps still have to do. That just signals to other people that are working on the project and yourself again that that this part of the code needs to be completed, that it isn't completed yet. And it is such a strong convention that I actually believe inside of Visual Studio it'll automatically highlight fix me and to do, whereas like other IDEs, I don't know if that's totally the case. I think you might have to download an extension in like VS Code, for instance, if you wanted that to work. But at least in Visual Studio, what we're using for this class, that's the case.
Yep. And to add on to that, Preston talked about the syntax for comments in C#. For HTML, pure HTML, it's this. I don't know what it's called in English, but that's what it is. And if you want to have C# code within your Razor views, and you want to add comments there, this is the syntax for that as well. Cool. I'm going to correct you, Preston. You did not get the easiest question. I got the easiest question. So I want to ask y'all, what does MVC stand for? Come on.
Model view controller.
Okay, I was gonna say
Yes.
everyone's gonna fail the exam. Now they're safe.
Oh, thank y'all. But yeah, model view controller. That's what this entire class is about.
Yes.
Okay, back to you, Preston.
Okay. So 7, which is kind of like a fill in the blank problem. So in MVC, what between model views and controllers is responsible for handling the business logic in a web application?
It'd be the controller, right, Preston?
Yes, it would be the controller. So controllers are responsible for handling the business logic, and models are responsible for the data and how it's stored. And then lastly, what's the other one that we would use to handle how that data is displayed?
Yeah, that's just the view.
Yes, that is just the view. And the controllers and the models are written in C#, whereas the views are written in HTML and Razor code.
Okay. I think Becca asked us to skip this question.
Yeah,
right?
she did ask
Or
us to
touch
skip
on
this
the-
question. Yeah. It was
I think
something
we should
that I
still
covered
touch
in.
on the advantages. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, you could do that if you want to.
Okay, cool. But yeah, we can skip this last part of the question, because I don't know, Becca said to skip it. And we don't really cover that in class. So can you name 2 other possible application design patterns you might have seen in ASP.NET, and what are the main advantages of each? So let's focus on just MVC for now, because this class is about MVC. So within MVC, what do you think? Why are we using MVC? What are the main advantages of us using the MVC design pattern to build our web applications in this class? This was way back from like the very early lectures. Easy to modify, yes. I could just use a different word for that, but it's easier to modify certain things, certain blocks of or parts of the application. Anybody else? There's a specific phrase Becca likes to repeat a lot. Yes, it has to do with the ability words that Becca mentioned during the lectures. Let me unhide this. Okay. So what I was asking for was separation of concerns. So again, maintainability, reusability, parallel development, all of this touches on like how much more easier code is to modify when you are writing it in MVC, where you're separating the data layer, you're separating the business logic layer, you're separating the UI presentation layer. And it's so much easier to maintain those parts of the application and reuse those parts and develop those parts in parallel when you're working in a team. So that's that. I'll just leave that there. You don't need to know about web forms, but yeah. Anything you want to add, Preston?
No, I think you did a great job.
Okay, cool. Let's go.
Okay, and then question 9. What is the responsibility of the view in an MVC application? We kind of already touched on this, so it should be pretty easy.
Yeah, Preston. I mean, the view is kind of like how like data's presented to the end user. So like, just how like I see it on a screen or how a user sees it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is what a view is responsible for in an MVC application. So one thing that you guys will use in your homework is the answer to this next question. What alternative is there to explicitly writing HTML code into the view? Yes. Okay, somebody put it in the chat. Ashwin put it into the chat. Scaffolding. Scaffolding is the correct answer. Now, why exactly do you guys think that we would use scaffolding as opposed to writing the HTML ourselves? Efficiency, yeah, that's a good answer. HTML is pretty repetitive. It's kind of tedious to make sure all the tags close, and because there are some tags in HTML, they're like self-closing tags, like image tags, and it gets kind of annoying to kind of keep track of that. So yeah, this is the correct answer. It's faster. Code is generated for you, so you don't have to type it out. So like efficiency that goes along with both of those. And then because the code is generated, there is less room for error. As I mentioned, like trying to make sure that every tag is properly closed and stuff like that.
Awesome. So what is the responsibility of controllers in an MVC application? We touched on this a little bit too. What part of the application do we code with controllers? Routes based off of methods, yes, that is a very good use for controllers. Calling the views as in, routing the views to the actions. But in general, on a high level, controllers deal with the business logic, right? It's responsible, it is the business logic layer for the MVC application. And there are a list of things. So typically it has to do with, all the processing. It starts with, complex code goes over here, writing the code to ask the model if it's valid. So you're validating the model within your controller. You include actions, which represent, pages in your application. It'll have a corresponding view. So you route actions to views. And it also decides which data or which models to display in the view. So that's a little bit about controllers.
Okay, so now let's move on to models. So what do you guys think the responsibility of models are in an MVC application? I think that of the three, this is probably the most difficult to understand. Okay, so Ashwin said in the chat, represent the entities/objects in the application. That is correct. Models determine how data is stored. It'll allow you to, well, you can specify whether or not you want it to be like you can have read-only properties and stuff like that. And eventually we'll get into using the entity framework, which allows you to like directly interact with your database by just like setting different properties on objects of your model classes, which is pretty cool.
Cool. So assuming that the website here is based on MVC architecture, when the user requests this resource, what is the web server looking for? And assume this, we wrote this in, using MVC pattern.
Yeah, someone put it in.
So Jay says, oh, yeah, sorry. The courses
okay.
controller and the MIS233K view. You're absolutely correct. And that's all there is to it. This is how URLs work in MVC.
Cool. Okay, so now we have two code snippets. The first one, what is the first one doing exactly? Why doesn't it have a string inside of the view function? Yes, so whenever you don't provide an argument to the view function, it's going to look at the name of the method in which it's being called. And in this case, the name of the method is index. So it's going to look for your index.cshtml file that is located within the folder that shares the name as your controller file. So if it was like the home controller, then this would look inside of the home folder and return index.cshtml within that. And then the second code snippet that we have here, it's returning the view, and then it has my view as a string. So what exactly is it doing there? Oh, well, yes. So it's okay.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say it.
No, it's okay. So in this case, it is looking for the myview.cshtml file. Again, like going with that example before, let's assume that this is in the home controller. It would go inside the home folder, inside of your views folder, and then look for the myview.cshtml file within that folder, and then it would return that to the user. So if you want, you can explicitly set the view that is returned, or you can just leave it blank and it will look at the name of the method in which the view function is being called, and then just return the CSHTML file of that name.
Yep. Cool. Moving on. Explain what the view imports, view start, and layout files are doing for your MVC project. So let's go one by one. View imports. What do y'all think that view imports.cshtml, what do y'all think that file, what is the purpose of that file? Or what happens in that file? So Ashwin says adds relevant helper tags and imports common to all views. Yes. So within view imports, basically what you're doing is you're trying to import all the library functions and the namespaces that you need all views to be able to access. For example, tag helpers is a very good example of the library that you import within your view imports to be able to use the ASP action and other tags within your other views or all of your views. And for example, you also import your models folder, the models namespace, my bad, to be able to access models and bind those models to your views. What about view start? We put very little code in view start, and it's only serving one purpose for us. So Ashwin says specifies default view for the application. Can you be a little bit more explicit with layout? Yes, absolutely. So all we do in view start in our applications is we're specifying what is the view name that we're using as our layout view. What about layout? And I'm talking about layout.cshtml within the shared folder. So Ashwin says base HTML for the app. Yes, I think to be more explicit, it's specifically you're specifying the HTML that's common to all of the views, or at least those views where you don't specify that layout is null. So yeah, common layouts like navbar, footer, things like that you want all the views to share, you specify in your layout file, and that's to reduce code duplication. There's a lot of words. I should have hidden this earlier, but yeah, that's basically it. And here you will observe a render body within your layout file, and that's where the code unique to that specific view will be injected into your layout. But yeah.
Okay, and then the next question. So what exactly is a view bag in .NET web applications? It's okay. I don't think we've touched on this too much in class, so it's fine if nobody knows the answer. Okay, yeah, so view bags just help you pass data from the controller to the view. And in order to set a property inside view bag that you can then access from the view, you would do view bag dot and then the property name and set that equal to some sort of value. And then whenever you're in the view, in order to access that value, you would just do view bag dot and then the property name that you specified, and it would then display that value to the user in the view. And in homework 2, I believe, yes, in homework 2, you guys use the view bag to pass an error message from the controller to the view.
Yep. Okay. Moving on. What is the purpose of the statements below that you have on top of the home controller.cs file? So this specific statement. What is the statement doing for us within our controller? So using the using keyword, what we're essentially doing is we're importing libraries, right? You're importing, and this might compare this with Python, you use the import keyword to import libraries in your Python files. What you're essentially saying is, I am going to be using this specific library from my dependencies in this file. So give me access to the functionality within this library. Let me unhide and see. Yeah. So it provides functionality from code written outside of that class's namespace, and outside of that file, outside of that namespace. And this is code written by someone else. So you're giving yourself access to code written by someone else. All right, cool.
Okay. And then this question, write an auto-implemented property called pay rate of type decimal, and a fully implemented property. Is there a difference in their function? So what this question means by an auto-implemented property is using that sort of syntactic sugar that Becca mentioned in class. It's whenever you have a property inside of a model and you just put get set, and that automatically sets up what value is going to be returned whenever somebody tries to access that, and then how that value is set whenever you assign a value to that property on that object. And then below the option that's auto implemented, we have what is kind of going on behind the scenes. So this is an example. You have a private variable inside of that class, and whenever the property is set, it's being stored inside of that private variable in the class. Then whenever the user tries to access that property, it's returning that private variable back out to the user so that they can access it. Yes.
And yeah, there's no difference between the two. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
they're
Okay.
exactly the same in function. And another name for get is the accessor. Another name for the setter is the mutator. Yeah, so accessor, you get to access the property on the class or on the object of a certain class. And then for set, you get to set a certain value for that property on that object.
Yep, sounds good. And then writing a read-only version of the same property. And by read-only version, we mean you should be able to read the property, as in you should be able to get the pay rate, but you shouldn't be able to set. You shouldn't be able to mutate it. So can you tell me the keyword you would use to make a property read-only? Private set, yeah. So you use the, oh, my bad. I think the way she did it here is she just didn't have the setter in the fully implemented one. But I would say if you were going by this, you would have private set over here. Does that sound accurate, Preston?
Mhm.
Is that how you would go about that?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, cool. So if it's fully implemented, you just remove the setter. If it was auto implemented, you would just go ahead and be like private set instead. And
That's another way of doing it. But I believe you could also do like public read only, and then like the type and then the variable name or the property name. I think that's another way that you could do it.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Mhm.
Okay. I'll let you take this one.
Okay. So this kind of goes along with something that I mentioned before, but what exactly is the difference between a public and private variable or method inside of a class?
I know some of y'all attended yesterday's session and I explained this 3 times. So please.
Okay, so Sergio put it inside of the chat. Public can be accessed from any class or view, whereas private is for that class only. That is correct. So private properties, I don't quite like how this question is worded. Private variable or method. I would have put private property or method. So public properties can be accessed from inside or outside of a class, whereas private properties or methods can only be accessed from within a class. And there are other modifiers you can use. So you could also use protected, that's another one, and virtual is another one. You could dive into those if you're kind of curious how they work. I believe that Anjali wants to touch on one of them later on. But for the purposes of this class, you will get away fine with just using public for everything. I think that on my final project, I used public for everything and it was fine.
Yeah. The thing about protected, I know some people had questions on that last session and I wasn't able to answer it. I'll tell it right now. So protected is also similar to private, where the properties will be accessible only within the class and its child classes. Whereas private variables, private properties or private properties and methods will be inaccessible outside of the class, meaning it won't be accessible to the child classes. So private is the most restrictive, I believe. Protected is like private, you can't access it outside of that class, but the child classes will also be able to access the properties and methods of that class. Okay. And let me know if you have questions on that, because it is a hard topic to wrap your mind around the first time.
Yeah, I remember whenever I was learning about the different type of there's some name for them put together, public, private, protected, virtual. The name I forget, but there's some video on YouTube that I found that really, yeah, thank you, Astron, access modifiers. Yeah, there's some YouTube video that I found on access modifiers that really helped me, specifically with how they work in C#, but they're also available in other languages. So if any of you guys have experience in Java, for instance, and you've encountered them before.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay, for a moment there, I lost connection. Cool. And I
Oh.
didn't hear what you said the last 2 minutes, but I am gonna assume you said great.
I mean, I hope I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, moving on. Signature for, oh. Were the rest of y'all able to hear what he was saying?
Oh, if you weren't, then please let me know, and I can say something. Oh, shoot. Okay. I guess there was something wrong with my internet connection. Sorry about that, guys.
You're good.
So I found some sort of YouTube video online that explained access modifiers to me in C# that I remember was very helpful for me while I was taking Killer K last semester. It covered all the different types of access modifiers, like public, private, obviously, but then also some more obscure ones like protected, as Anjali mentioned, and then virtual and other types. So if you guys, I could probably find that at some point and send that.
Yep. So for now, all you need to know is public. You can access properties and methods from that class everywhere. If it's protected, you can access the class methods and that specific properties and methods within the class and within the child classes. If it's private, you can access those properties and methods only within that class. Not the child classes also don't have access to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but for the purposes of this class, you'll be fine with just using public, to be honest. Like in my final project, I just used public everywhere and it was fine.
Yep. Cool. Okay, so write a signature for a public method.
Mm.
But the first line you write before you open the curly braces. The J is saying public, decimal, account value, and string parameter username. Yes, except the P should be lowercase. That's it. Cool. Awesome. Go ahead, Preston.
Okay, so for the next question, Becca did talk about this in class. It was like an entire like 2 slides or something that she used to go over this. So anyway, so in C#, you can have multiple methods named the same way in a program if you use something called overloading. Yeah. And she has a good few slides that go over specifically which method declarations would be valid overloads and which would not. So I would recommend looking at that if you would want to get more clarification on that.
Yeah, that would be very good practice. And yeah. Okay. Describe what it means to instantiate an object given a class called student with properties, name and age. How might you create a new object? Okay. So over here, okay, let's talk about instantiate. What do we mean by instantiating an object? Be it in Python or C#, whatever. So instantiate literally, oh yeah, Tanya said it, creating a new instance of it. Yes, you're creating a new instance of that class, right? Whenever you instantiate an object. And given a class called student with properties, name and age, how might you create a new object? Can y'all type into the chat some examples of how you would create this object or the code for creating an object of class student and the properties are name and age? That's just C# syntax stuff. So I'll just unhide this. Yeah, well, it's a lot of explanation. I'm gonna jump to here first. So the syntax for instantiating objects would be class name first, then object name, then use the new keyword and use the class name parentheses to call the constructor for that class. So again, this is the object name is an instance of that class. It'll be an object of that class. And in our case, you would have something like this, except I think you would have to pass a name and age. I'll update this later. But it's missing the parameters. You would have to pass a name and age within the parentheses as parameters. And over here it says classes only exist in theory until they're instantiated. Yes. And abstract classes cannot be instantiated. Can someone tell me what are abstract classes? A parent class, yes. So abstract classes are those classes that typically like solely exist to be inherited from, so to speak. So for example, a great example is from your homework where you had order, then you had walk-up order, and then the other type of order, I forget. But you never use this syntax to create an object of the class order. Instead, you have walk-up order inherit from order, and you create instances of walk-up order. So those kind of classes are called abstract classes that you just define so that child classes can inherit those properties and methods. So you won't be instantiating them. Static classes, not much of an emphasis on those in this class, but it's just good to know. They do not have to be instantiated. Cool.
Okay, so next question. So how would you guys define inheritance? You have to do it on your homework. Ashwin says a mechanism for passing down properties / methods of a parent class to children. That is correct. So setting up inheritance is really nice because it allows you to reduce code duplication. So let's say like in the case of your homework, you have a sort of base order class that the other children classes inherit from. So you don't have to rewrite the properties and methods stored inside of the parent class, which is pretty helpful. So we inherit Microsoft's controller class through inheritance. That is one example that I mean, we would not want to write controller classes on our own. That would be light years beyond the scope of this course. So that's just it's an easy way for us to copy the functionality of some certain class into a class of our own that we can add additional functionality to.
Very cool. Okay, so we have an error message. It says cannot implicitly convert type decimal to integer. Why do you think we might get that? Any guesses? So we run into this because we are within our code, we are trying to convert a decimal to an integer without explicitly, converting it. And Ashwin says trying to assign a decimal value to an integer. Yeah. So when you try to, for example, assign a decimal value to an integer, your C# would try to convert it into from a decimal to an integer. It will throw an error because a decimal is a large, I don't want to say large. When you convert from a decimal to an integer, you lose precision, right? You will essentially have to throw away those decimals that come after the digits that come after the decimal point when you're converting it to an integer. And unless you explicitly convert it in C#, it's gonna, be bothered by the fact that you're losing precision. So you cannot implicitly convert from a larger data type. Yes, it is a larger data type decimal to a smaller data type, such as integer. And you must use explicit methods like convert to integer to make this work. Okay.
Then why might you encounter the error not all code paths return a value when you use an if statement? Does anybody know?
Has anybody run into this yet?
Don't include a path for the else. What do you mean by that? Yeah, so Sergio, yeah, that's a more detailed response. So, see, if one of the conditions is taken, then it does not return a value in that case. Yeah, so let's say if you have an if else block, and inside of the if statement you're just doing whatever, and then in the else statement you're returning something, and then that's the end of the method, like there's nothing else after the else block, then in that case there would be no value that's returned if the logical path for your code goes into the if block and does not go into the else block. Yeah.
Cool. So next we're going to be writing a class header, and it's for a class called undergrad, inherited from a class called student. So again, by class header, we mean the first line before the curly brace is open while defining a class. So can y'all drop it in the chat what you think that might look like? And let's say it's a public class, in case there's a little bit of confusion there. Yep, that looks like it. So it would be public class using the class keyword, class name, and colon, whatever base class you're inheriting from, and the rest of the code down below. We have our last question.
Okay, so what precisely are data annotations and how are they used in your homework? Yes, one use of data annotations is to set a display name for the data, but more often than not, it is used for some form of data validation. So there are a lot of examples of data annotations. One of them that you guys use on your homework is range. So you have to specify that the value for something falls within a range of values from like a minimum to a maximum. Then you can also use what are called regular expressions to ensure that a string matches a certain pattern. That's one that you probably will not use very often at all, but I believe Becca provides an example for your homework that you can use. There are other ones you can ensure that something that a value is given for a certain property by setting by adding a required data annotation. So those are just some examples. There are more data annotations you could find online. I believe that Microsoft has some page on their C# documentation that lists out every one.
Yep. And that's it for the review questions we have. I think this is from Becca's side, and I guess some useful things to go back to might be your homeworks so far. We only have 2. And this, I believe this .NET Fiddle is for you to sort of play around with .NET code. I've never used it. Preston, do you know what this is?
No, I haven't used it either.
Okay. I didn't particularly use it in exam prep, but if y'all want to explore that, go ahead. Maybe I think this is like sort of like a what is it called? A sandbox for you to play around with the code. This is what it looks like. Yeah. To run code and test your code out. C# code specifically. Cool. For the rest of this, I think I'll stay until 5 here. And if y'all haven't signed in, please sign in. But if there are any questions you have about concepts, any specific concepts you'd like us to review or dive a little bit more deeper into, feel free to let us know and we'll be here until 5.
Yep.
And if you're leaving, good luck for the exam.
Yeah.